In the desolate hills of Wyoming, where the wind howled like a mournful ghost and the stars burned bright against a lonely sky, Caleb Warwick lived in a cabin carved from solitude. A former soldier, exiled by his own demons, he had spent 8 years in self-imposed isolation, far from the clamor of towns and the memories of war. His hands, once steady on a rifle, now worked the land, coaxing sparse crops from rocky soil and tending a small herd of goats. The cabin, weathered and sturdy, stood alone on a ridge overlooking a valley, its only company the whispering pines and the distant cry of a hawk. Caleb's exile began after the war, a brutal conflict that left scars on his body and deeper ones on his soul. He'd been a hero once, decorated for valor, but the weight of lives lost under his command haunted him. Guilt drove him from his hometown, away from family and friends who couldn't understand the darkness he carried. He chose the Wyoming wilderness, where silence was his only judge. The townsfolk in nearby Bitterroot knew him as the quiet man who came once a month for supplies, his gray-green eyes guarded, his words few. They respected his distance, sensing the war he still fought within. At 42, Caleb's life was a rhythm of survival, chopping wood, tending animals, and watching sunsets bleed red across the hills. His only companion was a stray dog, Scout, who'd wandered onto his land one winter and never left. The cabin held remnants of a life he'd abandoned, a faded photograph of his younger self, smiling with comrades, and a tarnished medal tucked in a drawer. Hope, like the soil he worked, felt barren. One spring morning, Caleb rode into Bitterroot for supplies, his wagon rattling along the dirt path. At the general store, he overheard a conversation that piqued his curiosity, a group of men chuckling about a mail-order bride who'd arrived on the morning stagecoach, only to be rejected by the man who'd sent for her. Too plain, they said. Too headstrong. The groom, a wealthy rancher named Harlan, had taken one look at her and sent her back to the boarding house, humiliated. The townsfolk's laughter stung Caleb, stirring memories of his own rejection by a world that no longer understood him. Her name was Nora Callahan, a woman of 30 with auburn hair and a spine of steel. She'd come from Boston, fleeing a life of drudgery and a family that saw her as a burden. The promise of a new start in Wyoming had been her lifeline, but Harlan's public dismissal shattered that hope. Left with no money and nowhere to go, Nora sat on the boarding house porch, her suitcase at her feet, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The townsfolk whispered, but none offered help. She was an outsider, unwanted. Caleb, loading his wagon, watched her from across the street. Something in her posture, the way she held her chin high despite the weight of rejection, reminded him of soldiers who'd faced defeat yet stood tall. He wasn't one for impulsive decisions. But as he climbed into his wagon, he found himself steering toward the boarding house. "You need a place to stay?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Nora's hazel eyes met his, wary but steady. "I don't take charity," she said. "Then work for it," Caleb replied. "I've got a cabin. Needs tending. You cook, clean, help with the land, you've got a roof." Nora studied him, searching for deceit. Finding none, she nodded. "Deal." She climbed into the wagon, her suitcase light but her resolve heavy. Scout, curled in the back, wagged his tail, as if approving. The ride to the cabin was silent, the only sound the creak of wheels and the wind's low moan. Caleb didn't know why he'd offered, only that leaving her behind felt wrong. The cabin was sparse but functional, a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, and a table scarred from years of use. Nora took the loft, a cramped space under the eaves, without complaint. She set to work immediately, scrubbing floors, mending curtains, and cooking meals from the meager supplies. Her hands, though soft from city life, learned quickly, chopping wood, milking goats, planting seeds. Caleb watched, impressed by her grit. She wasn't the plain woman Harlan had scorned, her strength made her beautiful, her quiet determination a light in the cabin's dim corners. Days turned to weeks, and a rhythm formed. Nora's presence filled the silence Caleb had grown accustomed to. She hummed Irish tunes while cooking, her voice soft but sure. Scout followed her everywhere, his loyalty split between master and newcomer. Caleb taught her the land, how to spot a storm coming over the hills, how to mend a fence. In return, she shared stories of Boston's crowded streets, her words painting pictures that made Caleb's world feel bigger. But Nora carried her own scars. Over dinners of stew and cornbread, she spoke of a father who drank, a mother who blamed her for their poverty, and a society that saw an unmarried woman as a failure. The mail-order arrangement had been her escape, a chance to build something of her own. Harlan's rejection stung not because she loved him, she hadn't, but because it echoed every dismissal she'd endured. Caleb listened, his own pain loosening in her presence. He told her of the war, the friends he couldn't save, the guilt that drove him to exile. Their shared wounds forged a bond, tentative but real. The townsfolk noticed the change. When Caleb and Nora came to Bitterroot together, heads turned. Whispers followed, some kind, some cruel. Harlan, the rancher who'd rejected Nora, took offense to her new life. He spread rumors, claiming Caleb had stolen his bride, though he'd cast her aside. One evening, at the saloon, Harlan confronted Caleb, his words slurred with whiskey. "You took my scraps, soldier," he sneered. Caleb, calm but steely, replied, "You threw away a treasure." The bar fell silent, and Harlan backed down, shamed by Caleb's quiet strength. Life at the cabin wasn't without challenges. A late frost killed half the crops, and a wolf took one of the goats. Nora and Caleb worked side by side to salvage what they could, their hands brushing as they rebuilt a fence or shared a bucket of water. One night, as a storm raged outside, Nora found Caleb staring at the photograph of his old unit. "You're not that man anymore," she said softly. "You're more." Her words, simple and true, cracked something in Caleb's heart. He didn't reply, but he didn't turn away. Summer brought warmth to the hills, and with it, a shift. Nora planted wildflowers around the cabin, their colors softening its stark lines. She laughed more, her humor sharp and infectious. Caleb found himself smiling, a gesture that felt foreign but right. Scout, ever the mediator, sprawled between them on the porch as they watched sunsets, their silences comfortable now. One evening, Nora touched Caleb's hand, her fingers calloused but warm. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me." Caleb, heart pounding, squeezed her hand. "Thank you for staying." The turning point came in autumn, when Harlan, still bitter, tried to undermine Caleb's claim to his land. He dug up old records, claiming Caleb's homestead was on disputed territory. The threat of losing the cabin, the life they'd built, galvanized Nora. She marched into Bitterroot, rallied the townsfolk, and uncovered proof that Harlan's claim was fraudulent, a scheme to expand his own ranch. Her courage, sharp as a blade, turned the tide. The town, once dismissive, rallied behind her and Caleb. Harlan's influence crumbled, and the cabin remained theirs. That winter, as snow blanketed the hills, Caleb and Nora sat by the fire, Scout at their feet. The cabin, once a refuge for one, was now a home for two. Nora, no longer the rejected bride, had found her place. Caleb, no longer the exiled soldier, had found peace. "Marry me," he said one night, his voice steady despite the leap his heart took. Nora's smile was radiant. "I thought you'd never ask." Their wedding was small, held under the pines with the townsfolk as witnesses. Nora wore wildflowers in her hair, and Caleb's eyes shone with a light Bitterroot hadn't seen in years. The cabin, once a symbol of solitude, became a haven of love. Nora's courage had healed Caleb's heart, and his quiet strength had given her a home. Together, they faced the Wyoming winters, their hands entwined, their future bright. Years later, as they sat on the porch with a child of their own chasing Scout through the wildflowers, Caleb looked at Nora and knew the war within him was over. A rejected bride,